Oh, hello. Welcome to Travel Trivia ASMR and another gentle jaunt around the world. Well, this time, specifically, it's a gentle jaunt around Belgium. And as I record this here in the UK, it is a very wet and windy autumnal night outside, and therefore we might have a few sounds of raindrops in the background from time to time. I know that in ASMR circles some people do really like that. If you happen to be the sort of person who doesn't so much like that, well, the least I can say is that at least I haven't edited that in afterwards. that is actually happening out there. But then I'm speaking to you from the north of Europe, so it's quite a common thing. An appropriate thing maybe, because I've certainly been in Belgium in frightful weather as well. Now, if this is your first time here, I'm so glad you've popped by. What we do is we make our way through a gentle trivia quiz. I'll ask you 10 questions on subjects like geography, history, culture, art and literature, and so on. And they'll all be related to Belgium this time. And after I've asked you the questions, I will spend a leisurely time answering them. One or two of the questions may have a one-word answer, but they are also opportunities for discussion, and I'll certainly be inviting you to join the conversation if you feel that you would like to. I'd be thrilled if you'd make a comment at any time, and of course, you know what we all say, do please press like and subscribe so that you can be among the first to know when new gentle jaunts around the world are published. So let's have a look at the 10 questions. And we're starting with something a little silly, if I'm honest. Why did they build a set of steps leading nowhere at Signal de Botrange? Apologise if my French pronunciation wasn't spot on there. It might be Signal, I suppose. But when you visit this place, there are some steps that lead up to nothing. What's the reason for that? Here's question 2, and this is especially for a couple of people who commented on a previous video, who I will mention in due course. How is the Belgian cartoonist Georges Remi better known? And if you've just shouted the answer to that straight away, well, first of all, what are you doing shouting? Is this ASMR? I'm sure you perhaps whispered. But if you just whispered the answer to yourself straight away, then I will have a bonus question for you when we come to the answer. Here's question 3, and I mentioned that history is one of our common topics. Here it is. Which Belgian village gave its name to a Napoleonic battle and a London train station? And if those two things aren't enough of a link for you, well, I could also mention a certain Eurovision song as well. We'll come to that in our answer to number 3. And question 4 is kind of related to question 3, or at least leads on from it. Which is the most spoken language in Belgium? I'm sure you can immediately name 2 or 3 languages that are spoken in Belgium, but which is spoken by the biggest number of people? And on a completely different note, but I suppose also wrapped up in history, what is the word for a Belgian chocolate with a sweet filling? And I just said the words wrapped up. We could have added and wrapped up in a presentation box. Question 6. Where is the Manneken Pis, the statue of a small boy urinating? And what I would like is as precise an answer as you can. So you could say Belgium. That would be a reasonable guess because of this video being about Belgium, but we can be a bit more specific, and we shall be. Question 7. What was the Atomium in Brussels built for? It is perhaps a symbol of Brussels. I was watching a video the other day about the Belgian Football League, which I'm not actually going to include anything about here, but within the video shown as a graphic to represent Belgium as a whole, never mind just Brussels, was an image of the Atomium. So it's one of the most recognisable symbols from that city. But why was it built? Question 8. Which Belgian city's name means landing point? And I have to put a sort of caveat there. That is one possible translation of its name. There's a second way that it has also been pronounced. In other words, people are not 100% sure. It could be either. But one possible meaning of the name is landing point. And just as an extra clue for identifying the city, we're more or less moving south to north as we travel through Belgium. So by the time we get to question 8, we are nearing the northern border. And that's where we are for question 9, very close to the Dutch border. What vehicles are allowed through Sint-Annatunnel in Antwerp? If we wanted to say that in English, that would be St. Anna's Tunnel or Sint-Annatunnel. But that's the Flemish. I have used the English way of spelling the city though. So, can you guess, if you don't know that tunnel, what vehicles go through it? And finally, we are not only near the Dutch border for question 10, but we've actually crossed to the other side of it. There's a clue. What's unusual about the towns Baarle-Hertog and Baarle-Nassau? And I know I'm going to get that pronunciation wrong, for which I apologise. But if it's any consolation, the second of those towns is in the Netherlands, so it's the Belgian one that we're more interested in. That's Baarle-Hertog. So then, those are our 10 questions, and if you want to jump straight to the answer to any of them, I've put timestamps in the description so you can do just that using the links to the chapters. But if you'd like to just close your eyes and drift off, dream happy thoughts, and occasionally tune back into whatever interesting things I'm muttering on about, then I'd be absolutely absolutely delighted if you'll stay. So, let's get on with question 1. And that was, why did they build a set of steps leading nowhere at Signal de Botrange? And before I show you on a map where that is, let's just show you a picture. And you see that there is a sort of an obelisk there that obviously marks something, and in the background there we see an artificial mound, and there are some other buildings around and so on. But the interesting thing is this obelisk in the foreground and the artificial mound behind it. And on the side of the mound that can't be seen there are some steps which lead up. So why is that? And as I go through, I'm going to mark onto my map the places that I talk about. And you will have noticed that I've used 2 different colours to represent regions of Belgium, and indeed a third if you count that one. You might be able to imagine why, but I will be explaining that in due course. I've marked the coast in blue there, only one, not sure what the word is. Is it a province? I suppose it's a province. Only one province of Belgium has a coast, and that's West Flanders. The rest of them are land borders, with France there, and there we see France continuing. Luxembourg is here. Germany is over to the right, over to the east. And then we have the Netherlands. This is the bit of the Netherlands where Maastricht comes down. And then the northern border of Belgium is, of course, with the Netherlands. And I've drawn a little bit of the slightly complicated coastline there. Now, Signal de Botrange, I remember visiting it, having just come from Luxembourg, which is there, and came up a road like that, and I think it's something like there. I'm going to plump for there. Now I will actually show you on a real person's map. In other words, one which is professionally drawn. I have to be extremely careful here because I'm going to use a very hefty atlas of the world. I don't want to knock anything that's going to make a horrible noise. So there we see, obviously there's Belgium as we just saw on my little map, Luxembourg is just here, and then the German border and that bit of the Netherlands. Now, I've got to be honest, the text on the pages of this map is so small that I struggle to read it even if I press my nose right up against it, which I'm not going to do in the video. But I did have a quick look earlier, and I know more or less where it is. The key is that we've got to look on this area of yellow land here. This is an elevation map. So the green is the low land of the Netherlands and the Low Countries. The yellow is the slightly higher ground. And that might be a clue to why we've got our set of stairs on top of the point called Signal de Botrange. And can you see, if you look very carefully in this part of the map here, it says Botrange 694. Botrange 694. In other words, 694 metres above sea level. And it is the highest point in Belgium. That's the reason to visit it, of course. I have been to one or two other highest points of countries, including some very high ones, but since I was in a car driving from the Netherlands into Belgium and actually heading towards the Brussels area, we were going to be passing the highest points in, first of all, Luxembourg and then Belgium. We didn't include the highest point in the Netherlands because the highest point of the Netherlands is not actually in the European section of the Netherlands. The Netherlands counts Caribbean islands as part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and so the highest point of the Netherlands is thousands of miles away. But we did go to the point called Knelf, which is the highest point of Luxembourg. That's 560 metres above sea level. It's right there by the Belgian border. And then just a little way up the road, we came to Signal de Botrange at 694 metres. And so, you might be able to imagine then, the reason they've built some steps is so that they can add another 6 metres. Up the steps you go, and you can claim to be 700 metres above sea level. Even though there are plenty of places in the world where you would happily be at 700 metres above sea level and be none the wiser. In Belgium it feels like an achievement, I suppose. And who doesn't love the opportunity to go up to the top of some steps and do a sort of Titanic pose for somebody who's waiting at the bottom with a camera? I'm not going to show you a picture of that, but needless to say, that happened. So, what's the answer to our question? Why did they build a set of steps leading nowhere at Signal de Botrange? Well, the answer is to reach 700 metres above sea level and make the highest point of Belgium that little bit higher. I told you it was a bit silly. And so on to question 2, which for my money is about the most famous and influential Belgian person ever to live. How is the Belgian cartoonist Georges Remi, better known. Now, of course I would say he's the most famous Belgian because I'm a huge fan of his work, but I'm not the only one. Indeed, I'd like to say hello and thank you to two people who took the trouble to comment on a previous travel trivia ASMR video. Patrick and Kata both came across my video about Bolivia, and I mentioned Tintin in that, and they said, well, how about some more Tintin, please? Well, here we are in Belgium, so how could we not? And I'm sure it won't surprise you to know, therefore, that we are talking about the creator of Tintin, Hergé. Hergé is the pen name of Georges Remi, and there's quite an interesting reason why he chose that pen name. Tintin started as a comic strip in a newspaper. Hergé was born in the early years of the 20th century, and so by the 1920s, he in his 20s got work as a budding artist, drawing cartoon strips for a Brussels newspaper. The newspaper was called Le 20e siècle, meaning the 20th century, and they had a sort of a children's supplement called Le Petit 20e, or Little 20th, or Children's 20th, I suppose we might say. So his job was to try to entertain Belgian children of the 1930s. By the time it got underway, it was the 1930s. And so the first story actually was Tintin in the land of the Soviets. The second story is this one, Tintin in the Congo. Of course, in French that would be Tintin au Congo. And we can well imagine that children in the 1930s, at a time when the Congo was a Belgian colony, they were going to be amused and entertained by images like this, showing the people that Tintin met in Africa, and also the idea of killing and chasing wild animals. Those things would not be appearing in children's comics these days, and I think Hergé later distanced himself from some of that early work, and it was later criticised, certainly. Indeed, this book was only published in English, I think, in 2005. A publisher finally got hold of it and decided to go for it, but when I was a child, this was not available in English because it was considered offensive in those two respects that I just mentioned. And this is sort of connected to why Georges Remi picked a pen name, because in his in the late 20s, and he was in his early 20s, working as a cartoonist, he had visions of one day doing serious art. And you know how artists sign their initials in the corner of their work? Well, he wanted to keep his initials, keep his name Georges Remi, GR, for those more serious artworks that were to come. And he said in an interview many years later that for that reason he decided to adopt a pen name, and he flipped his initials round to RG. And if you say the letters RG in French, it's pronounced RG. Hergé. Hergé is derived from the letters of Georges Remi's surname and Christian name, if you say them in French. It's a good job he wasn't English. It would have been RG, and it could have been something like RG Bargy or something. Now, here's a little bonus question. Hergé grew up in Brussels. I'm not going to put him in Brussels on our map because we've got plenty more besides to put in Brussels, but we can make a map reference of a different kind. Tintin, where did he live? Actually, I think it's never actually stated where Tintin lives. If you think about it, every Tintin reader in whichever country they're living in and whatever language they're reading, they want to kind of keep Tintin as their own. And so perhaps for that reason, Hergé never says Tintin lives in Brussels. Or at least I don't believe he does. If you know better than me, then please do correct me. But just as the whole story is translated into other languages, it would make no sense to take Belgian place names in the French language and preserve them in French when you translate. So the place names were obviously translated too. So we can actually see Tintin's street address is given. It's actually given in The Broken Ear, which is the story that I mentioned in the context of Bolivia in that previous video. And if you see here in this story, Tintin has witnessed some sort of scuffle in the street, and somehow he's taken possession of a parrot, and he's put an advert in the newspaper for, if this is your parrot, please come and collect it. And so we've got these two characters who are going to be part of the story later. They are looking at that newspaper advert and saying, it's an address to remember, 26 Labrador Road. I believe that is the first time we see Tintin's address in a story. In the French original, or the Belgian original, which was in French, that would be 26 Rue du Labrador. So, we know that Tintin lives in Rue du Labrador. We don't know what city that is in. However, there is now a Rue du Labrador. And it is in a place called Louvain-la-Neuve. Here is a road atlas of Belgium. And if you have really good eyesight better than mine anyway, you might be able to see here on the fringes of Brussels, there is a Leuven, and then some way to the south of it, in much smaller font, is a place called Louvain-la-Neuve, which means New Leuven. And the reason that Louvain-la-Neuve exists is because the University of Leuven had a squabble in, I think, in the 1960s, and they had Flemish speakers and French speakers, and they couldn't come to an agreement, and so the French bit broke away to the extent that they even went and started a new town. So Louvain-la-Neuve is a new town. And I went there because that is the home now of the Hergé Museum, the shrine to Tintin par excellence, and the address of the Hergé Museum in Louvain-la-Neuve is 26 Rue du Labrador. Isn't that just a wonderful thing? If you haven't been to the Hergé Museum, then of course I recommend it to any Tintin fan. And even if you're not that bothered about Tintin, that town itself is fascinating as a new town because it's bizarre. They basically put all the roads underground and all the pedestrian bits on top. So you walk around this pedestrianised town thinking, well, where's all the traffic? And it's all in underground tunnels. An odd place to say the least, but fascinating. Now Louvain-la-Neuve, I think it's slap bang in the middle of this province here, so I could put it here. That is now the home of Hergé and Tintin. But even if you're not a big Tintin fan, there is good reason to visit this neck of the woods, and it's related to question 3. Which Belgian village gave its name to a Napoleonic battle and a London train station? And of course, as I said earlier, there could be a third thing in that list. It also gave its name to a certain song. So there we were in Louvain-la-Neuve for the Hergé Museum, and we go just up the road to the very fringes of Brussels, where we find our Waterloo. And I don't mean that in the modern metaphor sense, which buys into what ABBA were banging on about. Waterloo is the village in question. And of course it wasn't actually Belgian at the time, because Belgium didn't exist as a modern country yet. But it was the village near which the last battle of the Napoleonic Wars took place, the one in which he was defeated by the Duke of Wellington and co, and therefore the London train station was named after it too. And let's just put it on the map here. I said that it's just up the road from where we just were. Oh, now does it need to be in the pink bit or the yellow bit? Ooh. I'm pretty sure it's in the French-speaking section, which places it in the pink. Okay. Let's pop it about there then. It's a fascinating place to visit. Unsurprisingly, there's an excellent museum about the battle site and about the battle. The museum is actually underneath the battlefield itself, literally underneath the field, and there's all sorts down there. You see people in costume. There's military uniforms. There's even, I remember, some skulls that were dug up later from the battlefield. So it's a fascinating mix of sort of triumphalist, this is what happened, but also the morbid side of let's stop and remember how horrible a battle must be. There's a video recreation with amazing light and sound, and also there's a more old-fashioned version of how one retells these tales, because nowadays you get a video presentation and you get to imagine that you're there through a sort of a multi-sensory experience. Well, the 19th century version of that was what they call a panorama, and you go into stand on a sort of a platform, and all around you is a circular ceiling, like a cathedral dome, and on the ceiling is painted the story of whatever it is they want to tell. And several of these panoramas were built, apparently. Not many of them still exist, but there is still one at the Battle of Waterloo site, and it, of course, tells the story of the battle. I have to be honest, I don't know much about the village of Waterloo itself, because with the best will in the world it isn't really the reason to visit. It's the museum. And that battle, and Monsieur Napoleon, is connected to our fourth question. Now, I must be honest, when I was planning question 4, I ended up with this question: which is the most spoken language in Belgium? But this is where I've ended up after first asking myself something along the lines of, why does Belgium exist? It's not an unreasonable question when you look at this map. And in case you hadn't already spotted, there's a deliberate choice of colours here. The sort of pale yellow and pink and grey is kind of a nod to the colours of the Belgian flag. I didn't use a brighter yellow and red and of course black, because if I'd done that I wouldn't have been able to write any notes onto the map. I like to think of this as a sort of Belgian flag that's gone through the wash and consequently has gone a bit pale. But we can still see that in the northern section, more or less, or just under half of the territory, we've got the Flemish-speaking Flanders, and in the south we've got the French-speaking Wallonia. Now, we should also add, if we're going to be really, really technical about it, part of Wallonia, and only the smallest part, we could sort of shade it in over here. It's just the tiniest section over here next to the German border that actually speaks German. And how did this happen? How was it that basically a country was formed across a linguistic and cultural divide? It doesn't seem to make much sense. And of course, history has a lot to answer for in most things, but particularly here. This is a map that I took a picture of in the Museum of the Battle of Waterloo, and it shows the extent of Napoleon's territory in around the year 1812, I think. That was the extent of his conquests. So you can see how France has expanded into parts of Spain and Italy, and then up here into what is now Belgium and Netherlands and a bit of Germany. And so following the defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, the other European powers gathered, I gather, at the Congress of Vienna, and they decided, well, what are we going to do about this expansionist France? We've got to stop that in its tracks. And so what they did was they created a united kingdom of the Netherlands, which included, of course, today's Netherlands, but also Belgium. And that was all well and good for about 15 years. But the ruler of the Netherlands, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, was William of Orange. He was Protestant, and he introduced reforms in the northern section of his territory. The southern section, which is to say the bit that became Belgium, was Catholic, and they didn't want anything to do with it. So, regardless of the fact that they spoke different languages, they were united by their Catholic faith, I believe. And so there was a revolution, and the other European powers accepted the idea of forming a buffer zone in between the Netherlands and France. And so the country of Belgium was born. I think that it comes from a Roman name for the province of the Roman Gaul, which was named after the Belgae, or the Belgae tribe, who lived in the area at the time of Caesar. So you can see why I didn't want to choose why does Belgium exist as my question, because it's quite a long answer. And I'll tell you what is an even longer answer is, why hasn't it broken up again? I think if there's a single brilliant achievement that Belgium has made, it's that it's still there. It was formed in 1830. I'm speaking in 1820. Sorry, I'm not speaking in 1825. I'm speaking in 2025. 5 years from now, Belgium will be 200 years old. And if that's not an accomplishment, I don't know what is. There are all sorts of reasons, I suppose, why they don't just go their separate ways, not least the fact that that Brussels, a French-speaking city, is in the Flemish-speaking bit, and therefore it would cause all sorts of complications if either half went independent. So back to our simpler question with a one-word answer. Which is the most spoken language in Belgium? I mentioned that we have less than 50% of the territory as Flanders, more than 50% of it is Wallonia, and also a little German-speaking section there. But the landmass is a sort of red herring. It belies the fact that more people live up here, and therefore 59% of Belgium's people speak Flemish. I don't know, I could write the word Dutch because I believe that Flemish is a dialect of Dutch, but it's fun to write Flemish for no better reason than the British comedian Victoria Wood once did a line. I'm learning Flemish, you know, in case I ever go to Flem. 59% of Freudian slip. 59% of Belgian people speak Flemish, whereas only 40% live down here and speak French. Even when you take Brussels into account, a French-speaking city, but only 40% speak French, and over here it's less than 1% of Belgians who speak German. And now, as they say, to something completely ridiculous. And we get a sort of ASMR bonus here, because it is going to involve opening a box. Yes, ASMR unboxing is on the way. What's the word for a Belgian chocolate with a sweet filling? Now, you might say, well, isn't it just Belgian chocolate? When you buy a box of chocolates, you call them chocolates, do you not? Well, no, not really. At least, not if you're being technically correct. Here is our exciting box. And okay, I'll come clean. I did not buy this in Belgium. I bought this at a British supermarket just down the road from where I live. If I had bought a box of Belgian chocolates, I think the chances of me getting them home without eating them before making this video would be very slim, unlike me. So, let's just see if I can open this box in a reasonably adept manner. And for those less familiar with ASMR, well, take it from me that there's a whole community out there of people who open boxes for the purposes of ASMR, because these sound effects are rather pleasant. Anyway, there we see Belgian chocolate, praline and caramel collection. Well, one of those words is the answer to our question. A Belgian chocolate filled with a sweet filling is technically called a praline. A praline. Now, I understand that's not the original use of that word. That was previously a word that came from France, so a word from the French language, but not from Belgium. And this originally in France only described a cluster of nuts, possibly even almonds. I think it might even have been specifically almonds, which were boiled in sugar and then ground down to form a sort of sweet, like the thing that you get inside of Ferrero Rocher, I suppose, although the Ferrero Rocher brand is actually only from the 1970s, I think, and it's from Italy, so it's not the original praline, but that's what I imagine an original French praline to be. If you know me to be wrong, please do comment and say, no, you're talking nonsense, and describe what a French praline is. But it doesn't really matter on this occasion if I'm not right about that, because we're not talking about France. We're talking about Belgium. So, what is a praline in a Belgian context? Well, we have to thank a Mr. Neuhaus. I'm sure you've seen the chocolate brand Neuhaus, Neuhaus. Jean Neuhaus, he was a chocolatier based in Brussels, and he developed the original Belgian version of a praline, which doesn't have nuts in it. It does have a sweet filling in it. And I don't think he was necessarily the first person ever to do that in Belgium, but you know how these things go. It only takes several people talking to each other and having similar ideas, and then one comes along who has the best product and the best marketing and gets the credit. Well, Jean Neuhaus was the man in question in his Brussels factory. I'd like to have had a Neuhaus box, but a Waitrose box will be the next best thing. There's our code for what the chocolates are. Suffice to say, I can't read a word of it, not just because of the size of the font, but because of the black type on a dark purple background. I mean, who is expected to read that? So, needless to say, I have no idea what the flavours are going to be because I can't read it. The one thing I do know, because I also looked this up, is that Brussels sprouts do come from Brussels. They had come originally from the Mediterranean, I think, but the thing that we know as Brussels sprouts now was recultivated and popularised in Brussels in the 13th century. So, in the vain hope that this here, which is vaguely shaped like a Brussels sprout, actually tastes of one, let's see what the flavour is. Wow. I'm actually speechless. I can't tell you how good that was. I think it was just a caramel flavour. But a praline being chocolate with something beautifully sweet inside, well, that's exactly what it was. And I did go out and buy a box of Belgian chocolates, especially to open it and eat one in this video, and it's some of the best money ever spent, let's just say that. I'm not going to eat all of them right now. But thank you for humouring me as I did. The one thing that we must do, because we have squarely arrived there thanks to Mr. Neuhaus, is to put Brussels on the map. And I could of course have written Bruxelles with an X in the French fashion, and I could have written it without the S at the end in the Dutch way, but I've gone for the English Brussels. Now we do have two more questions that are Brussels based, and here's the first one. Where is the Manneken Pis, namely the statue of a small boy urinating? I'm sure you've seen a picture of that. You know what it looks like. There you go. One of the most recognisable images, I think. And this is a picture I took a couple of winters ago when it was still decorated for Christmas. And what I hadn't really appreciated is that it's some way back behind a fence there. And the reason for that is actually connected with the answer to our question of exactly where is it? Now, clearly I'm not going to accept the answer Belgium, even though that's true, and neither am I going to accept the answer Brussels, because that's true as well, but I'd like to be more specific. So, I'm going to go back to my road atlas, where I happen to know in the back we've got some city maps. Oh, here we go. Here we have a map of central Brussels, and I don't know if now is the time to say I really don't want to upset anybody who lives in Brussels and is very fond of it, but I found it quite hard to like Brussels. Now, it might be my fault for going there at the wrong time, because I've been there twice. The first time was a very wet, grey September, and the second time was a bitterly cold January. I'm talking below freezing and very hard to be outside. So I couldn't muster up much enthusiasm for the place. Although I walked round and round and round, and there's some stunning things to see. Not least around here by the Parc de Bruxelles, near the cathedral there. The thing which I think lets Brussels down is that it doesn't have a river. Now, I gather that it did have a river, and in the 19th century they paved over it because it was full of pollution, and this was common in the 19th century, that rivers were full of pollution. Many cities took the opportunity and the necessity to clean the rivers and designed sewerage systems. Well, I suppose Brussels did as well. They just kept the sewage in the river and built over it. I gather that in recent years there are attempts to rescue it from the depths and uncover it and make a feature of it again, but certainly I would have warmed a lot more to Brussels if there had been a grand river running through the heart of it here. But anyway, I digress. On that bitterly cold January morning a couple of years ago, I remember leaving my hotel, which was near the Gare du Midi down here, and I made my way up through these side streets in the direction of the Grand Place. Grote Markt, as you would say in the Flemish, Grand Place in French, or if you're from the north of England, you would probably say Grand Place. So the Grand Place is very, very close to the spot where I took that photograph, the one with the Manneken Pis behind the railings. And that is, I don't think we could even see the street names on here, even if I had better eyesight, because the scale is far too small. But the original site of the Manneken Pis was on a street corner of two streets called Rue du Chêne and Rue de l'Étuve. I think the Rue de l'Étuve is basically the one that leads from the corner up to Grand Place. However, nothing is ever straightforward if it has been chosen as a quiz question here. The statue that you see in the street and the statue that I showed you in the picture is, dramatic sound effect, not the real one. Over the years, there were so many attempts to vandalise or steal it that they actually decided to take the original and put it in the Brussels City Museum, which is on the northeast side of Grand Place. And I didn't know that when I visited Brussels, either the first or the second time. I did not know that you have to go into the Brussels City Museum to actually see the original Manneken Pis. And so my parting message to you on the topic is, please would you go there on my behalf and see if it's any good. Because I've only seen the replica that's out in the street. I think probably the street replica, or not. The street is the place where it's more evocative, isn't it? So I have no regrets. Now, let's continue with our next question, question 7, which keeps us in Brussels. Here we go, here's question 7. What was the Atomium in Brussels built for? And on more than one occasion, I have seen a sort of a computer graphic version of the Atomium, which looks like that, and it's sort of used as a symbol not just of Brussels but of Belgium too. And as you see there, it is 9 spheres connected with tubes at different angles, some near vertical, some diagonal. And it's supposed to represent, I think it's an iron crystal. That's the precise element that it's supposed to be. And I'm actually looking here at the Atomium website. There you see in the background is the real Atomium, and someone in the foreground is holding up a map with the Atomium in the middle, but surrounded by a bunch of other stuff. And that is because the Atomium was built for the World Fair in 1958, which tends to be abbreviated to Expo 58. And in this regard, it's very similar to the Eiffel Tower, isn't it? And like the Eiffel Tower, it was only supposed to be temporary. It was built for a world fair. It was built to show off, well, hey, this is what we can do. Look at us. Here we are in the atomic age, the 1950s. We, Belgian scientists, are top of our game, and so we can build a building that looks like that. And it's not just a structure, it's an actual building, and inside these spheres there are, well, these days there's museums about the Expo itself and about that era and about the building of the Atomium. But for the Expo, I think there would, just like in any other Expo building, there would have been exhibitions of things. And they called it Atomium because it's supposed to be a combination, it's a portmanteau of the two words atom and aluminium. That's because the metal originally used was aluminium. It was originally designed to stand for 6 months and then be dismantled, but it became so popular that they didn't knock it down, and of course now it is a symbol of the city, so it will be there forever. And they had to replace the aluminium because it was rusting, I suppose, and looking shabby, and so they did a whole refurbishment of it in a recent year that I forget. It wasn't that long ago, it's about 15 years ago, I think. And they recoated the whole thing in stainless steel, and as you see here, this is a cloudless January morning with a crisp, clear sky, and it looks absolutely stunning. It is actually the single reason that I went back to Brussels a second time, because the first time was that grim grey September, and the Atomium, like a lot else in the city, looked rather sorry for itself in the rain, I think, and so I wanted to go back and give Brussels a second chance, and I thought the way to do that was to go to the Atomium. I loved the Atomium. It's odd, it's weird, it's like travelling back into a Kraftwerk music video or something, because they have sort of psychedelic lights and sounds playing as you go up the escalators from one sphere to another. It's an experience like no other, really, and I was happy to have gone. Let's just see, is it on our map? It's not going to be in this map of central Brussels, because I remembered that it's next to a whole load of parkland. Remember that Expo 58 map that someone was holding up in the picture there? That whole area is still parkland, where the exhibition buildings were, and also the Heysel football stadium is very near to it. So none of those things are on this city centre map, so it must be further out. I know it's to the north, but I wonder, is it on this other part of the map, which we see at the bottom of the page, where you can see that's the square there of the city centre. Oh yes, there's some parkland. Oh yeah, I can just make it out. It says Atomium. That's where it is. It's. I assume this is the province of Brussels here. So the Atomium is right there on the northern outskirts of it. Ah, okay. And thanks to the Atomium, I do have a fond memory of the whole city. I must go back on a summer's day and give it a third chance. Why not? And if there's some compelling reason you'd like to share with me why I should absolutely do that, and try to return to Brussels with a glowing review, then do leave a comment and share what that thing is. Now then, we are continuing north. Remember that we started at our most southern point, having arrived from Luxembourg. We've travelled up through Wallonia, we've arrived at Brussels, we're now leaving again and heading up into the Flanders region. And question 8 is, which Belgian city's name means landing point? I do like a bit of etymology of place names. Apart from anything else, they are often very revealing about the history and the geography of the city. The word Brussels, for example, comes from Bruxelles, I think, and Brug means marsh, and Cell means settlement, so a settlement on a marsh. We can reference the previous remark about a river being sent underground. One way to build a city in marshland is to concrete over the whole place, and I guess to an extent that's what they did. So what about this landing point then? Well, that is one of the cities of Flanders, and here's an extra little clue. It is Belgium's most visited city, and if you've been to Belgium, it's probably the first place you went, because it's the first place most people go. It's the first place I went. Landing point is one possible translation of the original Brigge. I gather Brigge is an Old Norse word that means landing point. It's also possible that the city's name comes from an Old Dutch word, Brugge, meaning bridge. And Brugge is, of course, still the Dutch name for the city, known to French speakers and indeed most international visitors as Bruges. I really want it to mean landing point, and I'll tell you why. Let's just have a look at, well, first of all, there's a map of the town centre or city centre, conveniently right next to Brussels here in my book. There is the well-known ring of canals which encircles the centre of medieval Bruges. And if we zoom out and see Bruges in the wider context of, here's the coast, we see that these days Bruges is quite a long way inland. And so why would it mean landing point? It would seem obvious that surely it must mean bridge, because it's not going to mean landing point in the sense of planes, obviously, because planes are much newer than medieval cities. It could, of course, mean landing point of ships. How is a ship supposed to come in here? At least an ocean-going ship, even centuries back, would be far too big to get into Bruges along these fairly narrow canals. Well, canals were built, weren't they, to provide access to places that rivers were not able to go. And you can sort of appreciate that there was a river here which did at one point provide access from the sea up to this place. Yet it silted up, and so ships couldn't come up it anymore, so they built canals to provide that access. And therefore, with the addition of medieval canals, and I gather that the earliest canals here are from the 11th century, so a very, very long time ago. Once you put the canals in, you can have some boats coming in. And therefore, this could have been a landing point, even though it's a fair distance in from the sea, with no apparent wide river. So that's why I want it to mean landing point. Of course, you may be watching this from Bruges. You may know the city and the region far better than me, and you may say, no, sorry, but it doesn't mean landing point. It means bridge. Well, if that's the case, do please explain yourself in the comments. It would be thrilling to hear from you. One thing that I do notice about Bruges is quite how close it is to this border here, and that's the border with the Netherlands, isn't it? And the reason I'm just paying attention to that is because I want to put it on my map here. So there we go, that's that Dutch border I was just looking at. Therefore Bruges must be about there. Marvellous. And so, to question 9, and we are remaining in Flanders. And going to Flanders' largest city, Belgium's second city. What vehicles are allowed through Sint-Annatunnel in Antwerp? And I'm pretty sure that Antwerp is in this street atlas as well. Ah, there it is, exactly there. There we go, there's the centre of Antwerp, and there is the very tunnel. Obviously built to take something underneath the Scheldt River. And this is a much wider river than any we've seen so far, certainly wider than the underground river in Brussels and the river that silted up and became a canal in Bruges. So I'm actually going to put it here straight away on this map. Antwerp is right here because that's the river estuary, that's the Scheldt River which flows out like that into the North Sea. Now I've again used the English word Antwerp. If I were using the Flemish, it would be Antwerpen, and the French say Anvers. And having been slightly rude about Brussels, I hope that I can be forgiven if I say I really liked Antwerp. Oh dear. Showing sides. And this is the tunnel that goes under the river in Antwerp. It is a slightly plain tunnel, if I'm honest. I mean, I have just said that I really liked Antwerp, so allow me to retract that slightly. Is a certain charm, I suppose, to the fact that it's that old style of tiling. The tunnel was built in the 1930s, so it's evocative of the time, isn't it? I mean, that places the tunnel in a certain period of history. If it was modern art in there, maybe it wouldn't have the same feel. I don't know. But the real striking thing is not the tunnel itself. This is from the, I think it's the Visit Antwerp website. The striking thing is the escalators that lead down to it, because they are among the only remaining wooden escalators in the world. And there was a time, years ago, when escalators were wooden anywhere, and one by one they were removed because there were fire hazards. Certainly on the London Underground, there's a very famous incident at King's Cross Underground Station where a cigarette butt underneath a wooden escalator caught fire, and the whole thing caused a fireball. So it's quite miraculous that these wooden escalators still exist. I suppose that is testament to the fact that the city goes to some trouble to keep them clean and functional. They're open 24 hours a day. The tunnel, after all, is a pedestrian tunnel. It's not for motor traffic. And therefore, the answer to our question would be, well, walkers can go through, but only bicycles can go through the tunnel. I suppose you would be able to take scooters and the like, but in terms of what we might class as a vehicle, I don't know if scooters count as vehicles, do they? Don't know. Anyway, bicycles. I certainly saw people going through the tunnel with bicycles, and it's 572 meters long, which means if you do what I did and you come out of the medieval old town and you go to the riverside and you walk through the tunnel so as to go to the other side and look back at the view and then walk back again, you've basically walked a kilometre. You've spent a kilometre of your life just going to look at a view, and if that is not the most touristic thing that you could possibly do anywhere, I don't know what is. It is actually quite a pleasant experience on a bitterly cold day. I was just moaning about the bitter cold of my second visit to Brussels. Well, it was the same week that I went to Antwerp, and it was hard to be outside. So that kilometre there and back in the tunnel underground was a welcome relief, I don't mind saying. By the way, plenty more of interest in Antwerp, and I was spoilt for choice in terms of what to talk about for this question. One of the standout attractions there is a printing museum, 16th century printing museum, and some of the world's oldest printing paraphernalia, as well as books and so on that were printed right there in Antwerp. And there's a medieval market square, and it's a handsome city indeed. So then, I think I've shown my true colours. I am definitely favouring Antwerp over Brussels. But is it my favourite city of all in Belgium? Well, I don't know, because we haven't yet got to question 10. What is unusual about the towns Baarle-Hertog and Baarle-Nassau? Is it fair to say that these towns are a more stunning alternative to Antwerp, Belgium's second city, with all of its UNESCO heritage and so on? I don't know. But as a quirky tourist trivia treat, it doesn't get much better. Not quite sure where this map originally comes from because it's in so many places, but it looks like it's an official map of the two towns. The darker yellow is the Belgian town of Baarle-Hertog, and the paler yellow is the Dutch town Baarle-Nassau. But everything surrounding it, inside the box, is also the Netherlands. And the main border, if you like, between Belgium and the Netherlands is not very far south, just a few kilometres south of this town. So if we were to put it on the map, it's not inside the borders as we see them here. I think it's actually in that little kink there. It's just there. And I'll only put the Belgian town Baarle-Hertog and not the Dutch Baarle-Nassau because it's a map of Belgium. But you can't really have one without the other. And this goes back to, well actually the aforementioned creation of Belgium in 1830, following the Napoleonic Wars, and then the Congress of Vienna, which created the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, and then the Belgian Revolution. This would of course give rise to arguments about, well, this land is mine. No, it's not. This land is mine, and so there had to be a treaty to determine, well, who owned what. And going back to historic leases and purchases, different landowners lay claim to different parcels of land, as we see here. And it was enshrined in the Treaty of Maastricht of 1843. And of course, these days, our modern idea of having country borders, which are sort of unbreakable things to be respected for eternity, that is a very, very modern idea. You don't have to go back very long to find a world where it was like this. You know, people just put up a fence and said, I'm having this. So I think what's noteworthy about this town is not the fact that you've clearly got an exclave of Belgium, because the rest of Belgium is some way south. So this is an exclave of Belgium, which is scattered into several bits. And then within that, you've got exclaves of the Netherlands. So H1 and so on, that refers to bits of Belgium. They are all individual exclaves of Belgium inside the Netherlands. But then inside those, you've got exclaves of the Netherlands, of which there are 7. I think there are 22 exclaves of Belgium. Some of them are not shown on this map because they're a bit further away, and 7 exclaves of the Netherlands. Well, what's striking to me is not the fact that this exists, it's the fact that plenty more places like it don't exist. Because if years old claims to land ownership were to carry forward into the modern age, then maps would be all over the place, wouldn't they? And it's only thanks to certain treaties which sort of swept all that aside. So it's rather nice that different claims have been honoured. Now, in practice, of course, this is just a quirky experience for the tourist. It leads to this sort of thing. This is probably the most famous picture, where you can sit outside this hotel, you can have a cup of coffee, and if you're so inclined, and needless to say, I was, and I did it, you can sit with your chair across the border with one leg in the Netherlands and one in Belgium. In other parts of town, the border goes straight through a shop, or it crosses through the root of somebody's front door. And in fact, the practicalities of this for residents is that if your house straddles the border and you don't particularly like the tax laws that are in the country where part of your house is, well, you can move your front door into the other country, and then you're you're under the jurisdiction of the other tax laws. The country you're in is determined by where your front door is, apparently. And there've been all sorts of oddities over the years, you know, shop opening hours and restaurant opening hours. I don't doubt that rules around where and when alcohol is for sale and all of that sort of stuff would certainly be fun if, for example, one thing is not possible in Belgium but it is in the Netherlands, or vice versa. By the way, I think the main route into town from the south, from the rest of Belgium, so it comes up here, and I've got a feeling that hotel picture that I just showed you is on this border here, between the largest Belgian enclave and then, well, this isn't this here is the mainland, if you like, of the Netherlands, and then the road to go out of town, it actually goes through Belgium again, if I remember rightly. So, what's the answer to our question? What is unusual about the towns Baarle-Hertog and Baarle-Nassau? they're inside each other. And if you did not know that, and you're hearing it for the first time, then I trust you're going to drop everything and go there as soon as you possibly can. I don't know if that says more about Belgium or more about me. But anyway, thank you very much for being with me for all of this gentle jaunt around Belgium and a tiny bit of the Netherlands too. I hope you'll press like if you have liked what you've been listening to and what you've seen. I also hope that you'll press subscribe if you fancy joining me again for more gentle jaunts around the world. Bye for now.